everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to be discussing Forging the Future, Unveiling the Pillars of an AI Hub for the financial industry, of course, representative of a lot of the conversations that we're having here at the Singapore FinTech Festival. As this space continues to emerge cross-sector, have an amazing panel with us today. We're going to go down the line here. First, just to get some background, Tomasz, we'll start with you in terms of where you sit within the AI ecosystem.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for giving the opportunity to share our experience. So my name is Tomasz Kurczyk. I am CIO for Prudential Singapore, but my involvement in AI is in my another capacity of head of Prudential Global AI Lab. And Prudential AI Lab is our initiative first in the industry to drive and accelerate adoption of advanced AI use cases across Asia and Africa. And naturally, making sure we don't know answers to all the questions. We don't have necessarily expertise and experience, so we are in deep need to partner in order to address those needs. And naturally, Singapore is a great place to set up because we can build those partnerships, such a great partners like EDB, as well as higher learning institutions like NUS, SMU, Republic Polytechnic, but as well as our strategic partners like Google as well. So Singapore is definitely a great place, and we're happy to share our experiences today.
All right. Fun fact, Prudential was the last trading desk that I sat on, so we are kin here in a way. All right. And Philbert, tell us about some of the work that you're doing in Singapore.
Now, thanks, Joe. Thanks also for having me on the stage and inviting us. And a welcome to all those who have flown into Singapore. I'm Phil Gomez. I'm part of the Singapore government agency called Economic Development Board, within which we look across different sectors. My job is to partner tech companies to make sure that that industry keeps growing and continues to be competitive. Whole bunch of stuff we do around enabling companies for AI, cybersecurity, and so on and so forth. But today, for AI, I'm very happy to talk about it, but we'll get into it in a bit.
Yeah, we certainly can't escape a conversation without bringing AI into it. So, Kiran, if you could tell us about the work that you're doing at Google.
Thank you, Jill, and welcome everyone. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Kiran. I'm based out of Singapore. I work for Google Cloud, and I lead Google Cloud's industry solutions and architecture practice in Asia Pacific. The mission that we have is to transform the business and processes in most enterprises leveraging AI. Now, that's a daunting one, but we think we are making great strides in getting our customers and partners to be at the forefront of that transformation.
All right, and Deep, to wrap up here, tell us about what you're working on at Nomura.
Thanks, Jill, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here. My name is Deep Thomas, and I represent a Japanese headquartered firm, Nomura, a top-tier financial services firm. And my role in Nomura is to run its data and AI strategy as its group chief data and AI officer. Personally, for me, when I joined Nomura nearly 3.5 years back, I was the first person to be here in Singapore as a group CDO. And our experience working in Singapore with the ecosystem makes me personally believe that Singapore is at a tipping point and at an inflection point to establish itself as the AI hub for the region.
Yeah, and Phil, let's talk more about that. You brought up the word enablement a lot during your introduction, and I have to tell you a lot of conversations that I have had meeting people. This is my 7th year covering SFF. I always hear, you know what, Jill, I was supposed to be here for a 6-month, 12-month project, and here I am 15, 20 years later. So Singapore's doing something right. So tell us, what has made Singapore successful as an AI hub? What are some of the learnings that you can share with us?
We're at the start, but here's what we are fiercely focused on. It's all about acceleration of use and adoption. And Tomasz said it earlier. We started this journey, ChatGPT broke through start of last year, November 22, and then start of last year, everyone started using it, and it hit the 100 million person mark, I think. So we've started that journey, and we said we're going to focus heavily around helping firms accelerate their time to uncover business value. If we can do that, then we need to then start, as you said, enablement, right? Building all the pieces, the the talent pool that's required, the infrastructure. Well, back then we were talking about a lot about GPUs, and then we said actually we need to pull the cloud companies along to enable the audience here. We need to think about startups, so on and so forth. But it goes back to point number one, which we are still very focused until today, is accelerate a firm's ability to uncover that business value. You get that right, then we get going. We've got two approaches very quickly. One is we say for firms who are thinking about it, who've got a plan, let's get going. So plan one is get going. Get going means we partnered with Google and we said open an environment, 8 weeks long, allow for individuals or companies, to come in with business ideas and turn them into a minimally viable product in 8 weeks, just 8 weeks. We've run 2 runs now. Each runs about 100 companies. And we've seen companies come in with an idea around how do I do talent management, CV screening, from an idea into a product in 8 weeks. That's get going. And then keep going is where anyone here in the audience who's got a bigger plan about workforce transformation, building AI as an augmentation to the existing workforce, we want to have a conversation. We've got grants and incentives available to help you to get there. So it's get going and keep going.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point that you make. And Tomasz, we were talking about this off stage, how you've worked in 8 different countries, and I think the general consensus is, and the attitude here in Singapore is get going. It's enough to keep talking about these ideas and potential use cases, but to actually put this technology to work and be able to quantify the success and efficiencies that have been driven by leveraging emerging technologies like AI really does lend to the success here. What's been your experience with this?
You are spot on, and Singapore has all the key components, starting from the deep pool of talent, because let's be honest, the AI is not actually something new, especially for financial services. People has been using it for 10, 15 years, and clearly in this space, especially things like AML, compliance matters, there's a lot of expertise here that we can tap, and this helps us as a company to translate this into making sure that we can move the ideas into the actually usable use cases. Because for coming back to the point of AI Hub, for companies, for financial services companies, what is important that Singapore's AI Hub for fast adopters. Because as a financial services company, we need to be able we can quickly adopt the solutions, not necessarily do foundational research. And with the environment of the flexible regulation, but as well as the fact that in Singapore, there has been a lot of investment in building the awareness and the culture of technology, as well as AI from the government across, skilling, and the fact that actually we have a concept of regulatory framework exports. It makes easier actually to build some of these solutions in Singapore, because we know that countries around in the region often adopt some of the regulatory solutions. So building in Singapore first and deploying makes this much easier. But naturally, one of the key elements is the support that we get from EDB, MDDI, and other, and as well MAS, to make sure that we as a company we can bring the values that we have, IP, data, enablement, combine this with the ecosystem to translate and scale it outside of Singapore.
Yeah, and Deep, I think that's a great point that Tomasz makes in terms of having the regulatory framework in place. And I'm sure as the Chief Data Officer, you're constantly thinking of that, whether it's from a privacy perspective or the governance perspective. How has that enabled you to drive the business forward when you're thinking about all of these aspects related to data?
Look, it's spot on, Jill. And as we speak, there are over 400 different policies or variations of AI policies that are currently being drafted as per OECD. I think Singapore, again, has been a pioneer or a trailblazer in terms of identifying the right contours of responsible AI, right from the feed principle. Sometimes I feel that they were a little too early, because of which it stymied the innovation. But nevertheless, I think we're at par with FCA and some of the international regulators with respect to what's needed on AI governance. Because at the end of the day, trust is absolutely important, right? That's the number one factor to drive, financial penetration into our clients and customers. What I also see is that because the regulators talk and each of them are almost at the same stage of maturity, the learnings that you get from each other, whether it is from Australia, Singapore, Japan, JFSA or FCA, allows us to then leverage any nation as a global hub, whether it is for risk and control components, be it on policies, frameworks, standards, or even for the aspects of things that are needed to operationalize AI, whether it is model registry, whether it is model valuation, whether it is model ops, and so on and on. So every location actually has an advantage now because regulators are looking at holistic approaches towards AI governance. Because most of the organizations that we are operating today are not local in nature. Even Nomura today operates out of 130 different entities, right? So I can't just be compliant to MAS and not be compliant to FCA or JFSA. So whatever we build today has to be built as per global standards, right? And hence the opportunity that we have with a government and a policy maker which is progressive in nature, an ecosystem of startups which are looking at providing the necessary solutions, partners, technology partners that are providing the enablement and the acceleration, and education institutions that are actually focused on upskilling, and corporations that are willing to take this big bet. That's what you need, which makes this place, quite formidable.
Right.
Set it up
And
top.
Kiran, when you...
Could I-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Joe. I didn't want to, Deep made a good point, and I did want to say also that, in trust, it actually is a team sport. Consumer protection is not just the job of the government. We have to also start going beyond consumer protection and thinking about business protection. And the government has a role to play there, right? So when we did come out quick and say, here's a model governance framework, it was in consultation with companies. So we did consultation with over 70 companies, and we heard them, and they said, hey, in general, they needed 4 things, right? They needed help with operations management. If you're rolling out an AI model, how do I think about that? Organizational structure. As a chief data officer, what is the role and responsibility? Is that individual singularly liable for it? Third, it's also about where do you put the human in the loop? There's a lot of things that will automate, but where is the human in the loop? And then the fourth is stakeholder management and communication. How do you communicate that to the clients, to the consumers, to the bosses, and so on and so forth? So we said, we created some framework to allow for companies to then, please, it's a draft, it's a live document, keep pushing it, advise us on what else do you need.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into what I wanted Kiran to comment on, as leading industry solutions and architecture. As this conversation continues to mature along with this space, you're hearing more about user experience and integration and being able to advise and foster companies to be successful with leveraging AI and the related technologies. What's your experience with that? How is Singapore influencing it? Because, to Deep's point earlier, you're operating within multiple jurisdictions. And this all has to come together to be a seamless enterprise and user experience at the end of the day.
Okay, I think to all my fellow panelists, the one thing that was perhaps not as explicitly mentioned is diversity, right? If there was one place that represents diversity in all its glory, I think it's Singapore, right? Also in its adjacencies, right? You have languages, you have cultures, you have heterogeneity in how the population is constructed, right? They all make, in a very intangible fashion, for a great recipe for AI experimentation to flourish. Okay, so that's perhaps the unspoken one. Now, coming back to the question that you asked, given the fact that Singapore happens to be the hub for many transnational corporations, and they are based out of here, they usually germinate a lot of the ideas for adoption from here, right? We also see facilities like labs inside of, for example, our own enterprise, but also in partner enterprises like the one that Tomasz was mentioning, right? So they all come together to move from ideas to minimum viable products to actually deployable solutions that drive business value. All said and done, while we said that AI has been around for a few years, that skepticism is definitely around. It's sublime, but it's still there. And there is a need for us to come together to cross that barrier of skepticism and turn the business value into tangible outcomes for businesses, whether it's on the income side or on the efficiency side. Like I was talking to a chief of a business yesterday, and they said, we are yet to crack the code on the top line from an AI perspective, because people are still experimenting to drive efficiencies in their enterprises. So from a solution standpoint, cherry picking the ones that deliver the biggest bang for the buck by working with the ecosystem that you see here is perhaps the secret to getting to where we want to be.
Yeah, I wish I could run across the stage and high-five you right now, because I think that's something we need to consider, is not just simply attaching AI to your business story because it's part of the consumer vernacular. Now that Gen AI is, consumers are discussing it. It's part of our everyday lives. We understand how to use it. There's almost that expectation that companies we interact with deliver that. But, Tomasz, from your perspective, as a Chief Information Technology Officer, you want to make sure that problems are actually being solved. It's not just part of the story, and how you're weighing the ROI versus making sure that all of the controls are in place before rushing to go to market, whether it's internally or externally.
So here maybe we can link as well the comments from Deep on the regulation. I believe that actually first element is we have regulation in place. It helps us to accelerate, because unfortunately for financial services, often if there's no regulation, no guidelines, we'll make it too complicated for ourselves, and we're gonna put us in a position that we cannot necessarily move, because we'll be trying to figure out from too many angles and try to de-risk it a bit too much. So that's the first element to the story, to how we can assure that we look at the risk side to protect and assure adherence and compliance. But what Kiran mentioned from the bank for the buck, this is the principle. Everyone here is working for enterprise, and as enterprise, we need to make sure that we create value. Create value for enterprise, and we create value for the consumer or the ecosystem. And here the ability to build the ecosystem and partner, especially cross public-private partnerships, but as well as partnerships across enterprise to tackle key challenges like healthcare. For example, we cannot solve it, but that's a systemic issue across globe that applies equally into the to Singapore context. So working cross help us to identify where are the opportunities and where we can find value beyond only our own value chain when we deploy AI, but through the collaboration, we can find another set of levers to maximize it and create the value both sides of the equation for the enterprise, but as well as in the end for the consumer or stakeholder that is on the other side.
I think that's a good point, and I see you nodding in agreement over there, Deep, in terms of when you think about developing these guardrails and regulation around it in a cohesive manner, you also don't want to necessarily regulate by enforcement, because then you don't understand the operating environment that you're in. That's actually a question that came in, so thank you for reading my mind there. There's a fine line with that, regulating by enforcement versus providing that framework so that we don't stifle innovation or brain drain from certain regions, because you and Deep are both talking about the talent pool and fostering that as well.
No, I completely agree. First is, before there were cars, there were no roads, there was no traffic signal, there was no driving license test to take up. Cars, because Singapore loves cars, is an analogy that I would use for AI, right? And now we've got cars in all shape and forms and AI in all shape and forms, and hence we need to have all the necessary controls and guardrails in place. However, that said, I think for us, or for Singapore to be, the capital, the thought capital and the brain trust for AI, there's still a lot of work to be done. It is an open race, right? Now, the question is, will Singapore ever offer the scale that India or China offers? Maybe, maybe not. Can Singapore offer the AI Council, because it has the understanding of the financial ecosystem, it has understanding of the rules and regulations, it has a very healthy ecosystem to promote the startups, big tech players, and it has practically all the financial institutions? Yes. Singapore can play a role of the AI Council. Can Singapore play the role of an incubator where new ideas are incubated? It's a smaller market compared to the largers of the US and the UK's, but it's still a market which is a great representation of our clients and customers. It's a great incubation center. It is perhaps one of the best locations to be created as an idea factory. And that's where we need to understand what can Singapore offer. So if I look at my world in Nomura, our group data and AI strategy is incubated here in Singapore. We run it here, we try and test it here, we got a global markets business here, we got a wealth business here, we got a retail business in Japan, we try and test it here, we run through our proper valuation of the benefits, whether it is on the efficiency side, whether it is on the risk and control side, whether it is on the business enable side. We try and test it out for a area before we scale it up. And we got to start thinking about what's the proposition that Singapore can offer, right? Otherwise, it'll be very hard for us to compete against all the different dimensions of what AI today offers.
I think it's a great point for you to address, Phil. And it's almost like when you think about it from a tech perspective, you have startups or smaller companies that have the ability to be flexible in terms of evolving with the tech environment, but you still also need, whether it's legacy players or larger companies, to be able to scale with. So that partnership there, whether it's public-private, whether it's multi-jurisdiction, I think that's part of the key there, where you foster multiple relationships in that regard.
Yeah, so one part of our national strategy was to make sure that, you know, Jill, you mentioned earlier this is your 7th time here or something, and 5th time, okay, and 2 virtual. So in the times that you have come, I think you have realized that you've stepped into a country that's addicted to long-term planning. And in that, then, with AI, can you really do long-term planning? I'm sure there are folks here in the room who are trying to build out a business proposal or build out a financial model to convince people who are more senior that they should trust in their ability to deliver corporate value for all the resources that they're asking for. My point is, the answer that you're probably going to get is, yeah, not really, maybe take 30% of that. And so with that, then, how do you increase your rate of innovation internally if you're not looking externally? And so we said we need to make sure and pay attention to how do we get startups to be a part of this conversation. We had an internal marker for how many acceleration units that we needed over 5 years. We got it grossly wrong. I think we're going to hit most of our internal targets by Q1 next year. So we've launched 3 accelerators, one with Google, startup accelerators, one with Google, one with NVIDIA, another one with Microsoft. We've got a few more. But the point there is for Deep and other companies who are sitting here to go to a place where they can use common language to address common problems. And there's a facilitated and there's a formatted and there's a structured environment to do that. So you're right that, we said actually, hey, we need startups, and the government has a role to play to nurse and grow and attract the best startups to come.
Yeah, and that's a great question that you would ask me, is AI the be-all and end-all, is that ultimate solution? And Deep, I think you would agree that this type of technology begets more technology, data begets more data, more products are going to evolve. Our conversation can look very different 6 months to when we're sitting here November 12th through the 14th next year. It look very different from across the entire tech stack. And I think that's that's the beauty of the moment that we're living in right now, that it is going to evolve, and it isn't like this is the end of the road, the end of the internet as it relates to these emerging technologies.
You mentioned something that sort of caught my attention. Okay?
I hope in a good way.
In a very good way. We tend to think of places as hubs for emerging technologies, but I think when you attach business value to them, you can also think of them as platforms. Platforms that create positive network effects, because there are developers, because there is gray matter here, because there are people who are keen to experiment and get to outcomes, more flock to the hub, more come to the platform to take from it. And the 4 simple things that perhaps everyone looks for is, can I learn from the hub? Can I use the hub to skill others? Can I scale fast? And can I build secure capabilities? Right? Simply put, 4 things that anyone would look for, whether you are a developer, a startup, an enterprise, the government, or the industry. They all look for these 4 things. To me, the idea of this being the platform for innovation that drives positive network effects, I think is very powerful, right? Because of all the reasons that we said. Companies like them, a government that facilitates this innovation, and the diversity that you can easily experiment with. I mean, what good is AI if you're operating in a very homogeneous environment? It doesn't work as well. Experiment with as many variables, with as much diversity as you can, and these 4 factors really come to play.
So let me just maybe add to this point. And actually, this is part of the thinking that we had when we were setting up the AI lab in Singapore, because what we want to do and what we are doing, we are taking from all our operating business units from Africa and Asia, sourcing the brilliant ideas in IP, Because in most of the markets, there are clear obstacles in terms of access to expertise, data, even the resources, compute, and so on. Bringing them, helping with the Singapore as a hub, support and unlock them, and make sure that we can scale them across. So it's building the platform. So it's the idea is to set up the platform and remove the obstacles, but accelerate the best thing that is there, which is IP and specific knowledge to create value across.
It's a very important point, Jill. You know why? Because the world will stop from sharing data. Yes, you've got to have data brokers, but those data brokers will only provide external data to companies. We are not going to be looking at companies sharing data, or even companies which have got multiple jurisdictions sharing data across jurisdictions. In the world of Gen AI, where you can create synthetic data, to what just Tomasz just said, what we are doing is we are creating synthetic data of our retail footprint in Japan, bringing the data over here, creating the logic, creating the platform to what Kiran just said, and then push the platform so that they can use that platform using their real data. That's the way you can create a 100x factor. You can't do it with people, because Singapore will never offer 100,000 AI workforce, but Singapore can offer the diversity of data, the strength and the robustness of the platform, the use cases which once built can be rolled globally, with the trust of the government and the policymakers.
Yeah, I also think it's fair to talk about, Tomasz, some of the challenges that are associated when it comes to building out this infrastructure. Is it moving faster than it can be implemented and regulated? I mean, we could, potentially be on the next big thing before even executing on this phase. Is that somewhat of a challenge that you have to contend with?
So I don't think necessarily it is a challenge, because likely most of the people are at the beginning of the journey. So it's a lot of people are still trying to find their way and avoid big errors and pitfalls. That's why collaboration is very important, because it just helps us to speed up the cycle. Where I see specific challenges for, let's say, this region as a whole, is more on the adoption and scaling, because in the end, coming back to talking about the bang for the buck and having the impact, the economics are very, very straightforward. Hourly rate in this part of the world is 10% of what it is, for example, in US. So saving 1 hour in US, generates completely different economical value than saving 1 hour, let's say, in some of the markets here. So here it's one of the challenges for adoption is how we can work together. And to be honest, it's most of an engineering problem than necessarily problem on the regulation. How to optimize and identify this area where the value is delivered with a perspective of short-term reduction of the cost and can be scaled and create lasting impact for the business. And that's why sometimes we might see the different speeds of adoption, especially not only enterprise but as well as across SMEs in markets like US and Europe versus in Asia, just because of the economics.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point that you bring up as well, and even including regulatory in there. Our frameworks are just fundamentally different. Instead of being able to establish a framework around said technology, at least in the US, not speaking for the EU, but it has to evolve as these regulations and new laws are put on the books, if you will, because it has to be legislated off of existing law. And that's why it can fundamentally look very different from that perspective, and I think that's important to recognize. But it feels as if that the confluence of this push to get something more constructive is certainly being felt, and I think that is something that's positive and is only going to help to accelerate many of the priorities that we have, not just particular to Singapore and this region, but globally. I mean, there's a ton of potential in other areas, whether you're talking about LATAM, whether you're talking about Africa, and just to, even in let's call it US or Western nations, bringing that technology to the forefront as fast as it's been able to have in a smaller economy scale here. So there's a bigger addressable space across different kinds of verticals.
And I'll just echo that point. I think consumer is a consumer regardless of where the consumer sits, right? And there are three things that every consumer wants: choice, control, and curation, right? As long as you give the consumer a choice, you give the consumer the control of their data and what decisions they want to make, and as long as you can provide them curated, contextualized solutions, they would love it. And that's where the power of AI comes in. And if the power of AI, which is responsible and is accurate, and it can do it with speed and scale, then you are competing on a global stage, right? And as I said in the beginning, every single country has the advantage to win the AI race, because it's no longer about scale. It's about your ability to create that differentiation through the cognitive intelligence powered by technology. Singapore has an advantage because of a number of these things, but so does many other nations. But it behooves this country to take this forward because of the conducive environment that it has to create global platforms that can be scaled and extended beyond this region, globally to financial services and other industries.
Phil, and
Yeah, Jill.
I know I'm putting him under pressure, but
No. Deep gets it. I mean, his point is for me, it's hitting a sweet spot because Singapore is not an end market. Let's zoom out. Then how about Southeast Asia? Zoom out a bit more. That's South Asia. Let's just focus there, right? The consumers in South Asia. And there are 1.6, 1.8 billion people. But that's a broad number. So you zoom in a bit more and you say, okay, let's focus just on Southeast Asia. Just yesterday, Google, Temasek, Bain released a report. Frequently, yearly they do this. It's a Southeast Asia economy report. In 2016, they predicted that Southeast Asia will be a $200 billion market in 2025. They got it wrong. They hit 200 billion in 2022. And then they started correcting and they realized, maybe it's not so important to talk about where it's going to be. We know it's going up. The point I'm making is there is a demographic bonus of just the number of people entering the workforce, to Deep's point. So you have to think about scale. But scale also in a non-homogeneous market, which has its, intricacies around languages and so on. But Southeast Asia as a market is interesting. The other one that we should start thinking about is also Southeast Asia as a labor force. Singapore cannot host 100,000 AI people. We said in our national AI strategy that the one thing that we need to go ahead of the curve is on government's end. We fund and we pay and try and train 15,000 AI practitioners, developers that everyone on this stage can hire, or everyone can hire. But what about Southeast Asia as a labor force? Today, it's already going to hit about 350 million people in Southeast Asia. Formal, informal, yes. We need to zoom in a bit more to figure out how many are STEM educated. But think of the opportunity, which is north of 200 billion, and then an accessible market of labor force of about 300 million odd people. Then add India as a multiplication factor. So I get excited because AI doesn't stress you out, or rather you don't get stressed out about how do I do that. AI is that multiplication factor that allows you to scale.
which is a great point too, and it's something that we should recognize. The demographics here are incredible. I mean, you really are within the sweet spot. Whether, to your point, whether it's STEM or other industries, I mean, the youth that is here and the way the education systems have been flourishing really does lend to some great demographics. We have, we'll go around the horn quickly in terms of your outlook. We have about 30 seconds for each of you. We'll start down with you, Kiran, if you just want to give your outlook, whether, I'm sorry, Kiran. We haven't gotten to you in a while. You were on my mind here, but just in terms of your outlook, whether it's Singapore, the region, even bigger.
I see optimism. Sorry, I see optimism. I see opportunities, and I see the perfect ingredients coming together to make this work. To everything that my co-panelists said, there is enough and more for everyone to contribute to and take from as part of Singapore as the hub.
Yeah. And now, Deep.
Yeah. As I said, Singapore, for a small nation, pardon me saying that, can clearly play the role of a big brother, because it has every single ingredient to transform the region, to help compete and win in the air race.
All right. Phil.
I'm not sure about Big Brother, but as a navigator, if people come in, they get an idea, they meet somebody, they unlock that opportunity. My outlook is I'm excited about that Southeast Asia plus India demographic bonus. I'm excited about that as the North Star and the ability for us to use all these enablement tools like AI today and could be something tomorrow to unlock that market value.
Definitely, I'm positive because, like everyone else here, because we are in the thick of it, and if we are not positive, we will not be able to make the changes. In the same time, I think we are all aware about the challenges and limitations, but keeping the eyes on them and creating value. Because, as mentioned before, AI has opportunity to create great economical output as a multiplication force, but as well as opportunity to help even with things like energy transition, given the need for so much of compute and energy that need to be required to support. So there's a real benefits and potential knock-on effect in terms of positive value creation across. So very excited in the next 3 to 5 years.
All right, meeting energy demand. That's our next panel. I think we have another topic coming up. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks for joining us all today. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.